The champagne flutes clinked against each other as 200 guests raised their glasses for the toast. My older sister Rebecca stood radiant in her designer wedding gown, a vision of happiness. I'd spent months organizing every detail of this perfect day. But when my mother stepped to the microphone, clutching her champagne glass with trembling fingers, she delivered words that would shatter everything. "Actually," she said, her voice carrying across the hushed ballroom, "there's something everyone should know about my daughter Emily. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." I should have seen it coming. The signs were always there, hidden in plain sight like ghosts haunting the periphery of my childhood. Growing up in Riverside, California, our family looked picture-perfect from the outside. My father, Michael Harrison, owned a successful construction company that built half the mansions in the nearby hills. My mother, Patricia, served on the hospital board and hosted charity luncheons in our sprawling Tudor-style home. Rebecca was born when our mother was 26, during what everyone called the golden years of their marriage. I arrived 5 years later, unplanned and unexpected. While Rebecca inherited our mother's striking auburn hair and classic features, I got the muddy brown locks that matched neither parent and the awkward angles that made relatives tilt their heads when they said I looked interesting. "Emily needs to try harder," became my mother's mantra throughout my childhood. Try harder at piano lessons. Try harder at etiquette classes. Try harder to lose the baby fat that never seemed to leave, despite Rebecca's naturally athletic frame. Meanwhile, Rebecca glided through life collecting trophies, honor roll certificates, and admiring glances wherever she went. The first hint came when I was 8. I'd fallen from the monkey bars at Oakwood Elementary, breaking my arm in 2 places. As we sat in the emergency room, I overheard my mother on the phone with my father. "Yes, Emily's arm is broken. We'll probably be here for hours." "No, Rebecca's fine. She's at her friend's house working on their science project." Then her voice dropped lower. "Sometimes I wonder if—" She caught sight of me and abruptly ended the call. I wondered what she'd been about to say for years. Bye. Middle school, the subtle favoritism became impossible to ignore. When Rebecca brought home straight A's, our parents threw a dinner party. When I brought home the same grades, they said, "Finally," and moved on to discussing Rebecca's acceptance into the youth orchestra. Rebecca's friends were always welcome to stay for sleepovers. Mine were tolerated for exactly 2 hours before my mother would find reasons to send them home. "You need to understand your place in this family," my father told me one night when I was 13. We were sitting in his study where he'd called me to discuss my attitude problem. The mahogany desk between us felt like a fortress. "Rebecca will inherit the business someday. She has the head for it. You should focus on finding a good husband." I remember staring at the framed hunting photographs on the wall, all featuring my father and Rebecca in matching camouflage jackets. I wasn't in any of them. High school brought new revelations. During a heated argument about college applications, my mother's carefully controlled facade cracked. "Do you have any idea how much money we've spent on you?" she hissed, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. "The tutoring, the therapists, the attempts to fix your shortcomings? Rebecca never needed any of that. Why did you even have me?" I shouted back, tears streaming down my face. For a moment, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. Then she smoothed her silk blouse and composed herself. "Every family has its reasons, Emily. Let's leave it at that." But I couldn't leave it at that. The question haunted me through sleepless nights and distracted days. I started paying closer attention to family conversations, piecing together fragments of overheard phone calls and hushed discussions that stopped whenever I entered the room. The breakthrough came accidentally during my junior year. I was homesick from school when the mail carrier delivered a large envelope from St. Joseph's Hospital. Curious and bored, I signed for it and brought it to my mother's home office. As I set it on her desk, a stack of papers slipped out. Medical records with my name on them. I shouldn't have read them. I knew that. But something in the header caught my eye. Donor status, conditional match. Below it, in clinical black and white, was a detailed medical history I'd never seen before. Blood tests, tissue typing, compatibility analysis. My hands shook as I continued reading. There were multiple reports dating back to when I was born, all focusing on my potential as a bone marrow donor. Notes about my blood type being perfectly aligned with Rebecca's. References to discussions with genetic counselors about insurance policies and medical contingency planning. The sound of my mother's car in the driveway sent me scrambling to return the papers to their envelope, but I couldn't unsee what I'd read. That night at dinner, I watched my parents with new eyes. Every gesture, every conversation took on a different meaning. "How's Rebecca feeling?" my father asked, as he did every night. "Still tired," my mother replied. "The anemia's been persistent." I nearly choked on my food. Anemia. One of the conditions listed in those medical files as particularly concerning bone marrow compatibility. Suddenly, all those childhood doctor's appointments, the extensive blood work my mother insisted on every year, made horrible sense. The final piece fell into place the following week, during a family dinner with my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, who rarely visited. Wine always loosened her tongue, and that night was no exception. "Remember when Patricia was desperate for another baby?" she said to my Uncle Joe, gesturing with her glass. "How she dragged everyone to specialists, trying every fertility treatment imaginable, and all those talks about just-in-case scenarios?" Mother's face went ashen. "Linda, please." "Oh, come on. Emily's old enough to know she was the family's insurance policy. You were so worried about Rebecca having complications from her condition. Linda!" My mother's voice cut through the room like ice. But the damage was done. I sat frozen, my fork halfway to my mouth, as the truth crystallized. I wasn't the beloved second child, the planned addition to complete our family. I was a contingency plan, grown in my mother's womb like a spare parts factory, carefully maintained and monitored for the day my sister might need what only I could provide. That night, I lay awake replaying every moment of my childhood through this new lens. The constant doctor visits, the way my mother's interest in my health bordered on obsessive, the detailed medical files she kept, updated religiously. Even my father's comment about focusing on finding a good husband, they weren't thinking about my happiness or independence. They were ensuring their insurance policy wouldn't go too far from home. A week later, I confronted them directly. We were in the living room, my parents reading the newspaper while Rebecca practiced violin in the sunroom. "I found the medical files," I said quietly. My mother's newspaper rustled as her hands tightened. My father looked up slowly, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "What files would those be, Emily?" "The ones about me being Rebecca's potential donor, the tissue typing reports, the genetic compatibility assessments, all of it." The silence stretched unbearably. Finally, my father removed his glasses and set them on the coffee table. "We did what any responsible parents would do. We wanted to make sure both our daughters would be protected. You had me as an insurance policy for Rebecca's health problems. We had you because we wanted another child," my mother said. But her words rang hollow after what I'd read. "You wanted a spare parts inventory," I countered. "That's why you keep pushing me to stay close to home for college. Why are you so invested in my health records? Why have you never really cared about my goals or dreams?" Rebecca's violin had stopped. She stood in the doorway, pale as her white practice shirt. "What are you talking about?" "Ask them," I said, gesturing to our parents. "Ask them why they really wanted me." The conversation that followed revealed layers of deception I hadn't imagined. Yes, they'd wanted another child. But yes, They'd also been advised by Rebecca's doctors to consider having a second child who could potentially help if her condition worsened. They'd undergone genetic testing, taken precautions to ensure compatibility, and monitored everything, obsessively. "We love you both equally," my mother insisted. But even Rebecca looked skeptical. "If you love us equally, why does Emily never get the attention I do?" Rebecca asked. "Why do you dismiss her achievements and obsess over her health instead?" For once, my parents had no ready answers. The next several months were a masterclass in family therapy. We attended sessions twice a week, unpacking decades of dysfunction. I learned that Rebecca had suspected something was off, but hadn't known the extent. She'd thought our parents' favoritism toward her was simply because she was the older, more accomplished child. "I feel guilty now," she admitted during one session. "All those times I got special treatment, and you were just waiting in the wings as my backup plan." "It's not your fault," I told her, and meant it. She couldn't have known. We were both victims of our parents' misguided attempt at medical preparedness disguised as family planning. Slowly, painfully, our family began to rebuild. My parents acknowledged their failures, though changing ingrained patterns proved challenging. They started making genuine efforts to support my dreams. I'd been accepted to the University of Colorado for marine biology, a passion they'd previously dismissed as impractical for someone who might need to stay close to home. Rebecca's health stabilized through medication, reducing the immediate concern about needing a transplant. She started asserting boundaries with our parents too, refusing to let them use her well-being as leverage for controlling either of us. By my senior year, I'd developed a new relationship with my family. Not perfect, but honest. We talked openly about the past, about what had been done and why. I found myself forgiving, though not forgetting. Understanding can coexist with hurt. That's how we found ourselves at Rebecca's wedding 4 years later. She'd met Joseph Chen at her law firm, both working late hours on a complicated case, bonding over shared takeout and legal briefs. They were perfect together in a way that transcended the superficial qualities my mother had always valued. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I'd thrown myself into planning the wedding, partly out of love for my sister, partly to prove I could organize something spectacular. Every detail was carefully chosen. The orchid centerpieces, the 7-tier cake, the string quartet for the ceremony. I wanted this day to be flawless for Rebecca. The ceremony at Valley View Estate had gone beautifully. Rebecca's dress, a custom creation from a local designer, made her look like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. Joseph's vows brought tears to everyone's eyes, including mine. As I stood beside her as maid of honor, I felt genuine happiness for my sister. The reception buzzed with celebration. Our father had spared no expense on the venue, a converted wine estate with sweeping views of the valley. The DJ played everything from classical favorites to dance hits, keeping the energy high. I circulated among guests, ensuring everyone had drinks and food, that the photographer captured all the key moments. But then came the toasts. The best man, Joseph's brother Mark, spoke first. He told warm, funny stories about Joseph's childhood, about how he always knew exactly what he wanted and never settled for less. The audience laughed and applauded. My father followed. His speech focused on Rebecca's achievements and how proud he was of her success. Standard father of the bride material, though I noticed he mentioned me only in passing as Rebecca's devoted sister. Then my mother stood up. She was resplendent in her mother of the bride dress, a pale lavender creation that complemented her perfectly styled silver hair. She'd been drinking steadily throughout the reception, something I'd noticed but hadn't worried about. My mother could handle her alcohol, or so I thought. "I want to share something special tonight," she began, her voice carrying that forced, cheerfulness I'd learned to recognize as dangerous. About family and love and the choices we make. I felt my stomach tighten. Something was coming. Rebecca has always been special. From the day she was born, we knew she was extraordinary. But being extraordinary sometimes comes with challenges. She paused, taking a larger sip of champagne than necessary. When Rebecca was diagnosed with her blood condition as a child, we were terrified. The doctors told us to prepare for anything. Where was she going with this? I glanced at my father, who looked suddenly pale. Rebecca had stopped smiling. So we did what any loving parents would do. We made sure our family was prepared. We took out extra insurance. We saved money. And she looked directly at me, her eyes glittering with wine and something else. We made sure we had backup plans. My heart stopped. Surely she wasn't going to... Emily, she continued, her smile sharp as glass. You might not know this, but you were our insurance policy. Our beautiful, wonderful insurance policy. The champagne flute trembled in her hand. But the funny thing about insurance is you hope you never have to use it. And thankfully, we never did. The ballroom fell silent except for the creak of chairs as guests shifted uncomfortably. 200 people stared at us, and I felt every single gaze burning into my skin. So tonight, as we celebrate Rebecca's perfect life, her perfect marriage, I think it's important everyone knows the truth. Her voice rose, carrying to every corner of the room. Emily exists because we needed a backup plan for Rebecca. She was never meant to be the main character of our story. She was always just in case. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. In the deafening silence that followed, I heard my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Rebecca's face crumpled in horror. My father moved toward my mother, but it was too late. The words hung in the air, impossible to take back. Just in case. Just in case. Just in case. I'd known, of course. We'd discussed this in therapy, worked through it, found peace with it. But having it announced to 200 people, including extended family, Rebecca's new in-laws, colleagues, friends, felt like being stripped naked and thrown on stage. Emily, I didn't mean... My mother started, reaching for me. I stepped back. You meant every word, I said quietly. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Rebecca was mortified, Joseph furious on my behalf. Guests whispered and stared. Some tried to approach me with awkward condolences, as if someone had died. In a way, someone had. The illusion that we'd truly healed as a family. That night, after helping Rebecca out of her gown and ensuring the wedding gifts were secure, I drove to the oceanside motel I'd booked for myself. I hadn't told anyone my plans. I sat on the balcony, watching the waves crash against the shore, and felt oddly calm. My phone buzzed constantly with messages. Rebecca apologizing profusely. My father demanding I call him. Friends and relatives weighing in with their shock, but I ignored them all. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and began researching marine biology programs in Australia. If I was ever going to stop being defined by what others saw as my purpose, I needed distance. Real distance. By morning, I'd applied to 3 universities down under. By the following week, I'd received an acceptance from the University of Queensland. And by the time the wedding photos arrived in the mail, beautiful pictures capturing happiness and horror in equal measure, I had my visa approved. On the day I left, only Rebecca came to see me off at the airport. We'd talked extensively. Since the wedding, working through the complex emotions neither of us knew how to navigate. I'll visit, she promised, hugging me tightly. And Joseph wants you to know his new sister-in-law is welcome anytime. I know, I said. Maybe by the time I come back, Mom will have sobered up permanently, in every sense. Rebecca's laugh was watery. She's in intensive therapy now. Dad insisted. They're both trying to understand how they got it so wrong. It's a start, I agreed. As I walked toward my gate, I felt lighter with each step. For 24 years, I'd lived in the shadow of my sister's potential needs. Now, 10,000 miles away, surrounded by coral reefs and marine life, I would finally discover who Emily Harrison could be when she existed just because, not just in case. The airport announcement called my flight to Brisbane. I handed over my boarding pass, took one last look at the familiar California coastline, and stepped forward into a future entirely my own. Australia welcomed me with sunshine and possibility. The University of Queensland's marine biology program exceeded my expectations. I threw myself into studies with a passion I'd kept buried for years. My first semester, I joined a research team studying coral reef restoration. My supervisor, Dr. Margaret Finnegan, saw something in me that my parents never had. "You have the instincts of a natural scientist," she told me after my third breakthrough observation about reef parasite behavior. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I shared an apartment with two local students, Sarah Wong and Kate Mitchell. They taught me about Australian slang, took me to beach bonfires, and never once asked about my complicated family history. To them, I was just Emily, the American girl who could identify sea creatures at first glance and made terrible coffee. Life fell into a rhythm. Early morning research dives, afternoon laboratory work, evenings spent transcribing findings or enjoying the vibrant Brisbane nightlife. I dated casually, a surfing instructor named Ben, a fellow marine biology student named Raj, but nothing serious. I was rediscovering myself, not ready to fold my identity into someone else's. Meanwhile, back home, things slowly changed. Rebecca called weekly, updating me on family developments. Our parents sold the Riverside house and downsized to a smaller place in San Diego. They'd started volunteering with family counseling services, working through their own issues by helping others. Mom actually admitted last week that she realizes now how much damage the insurance policy mindset caused, Rebecca told me during one of our video calls. "She's writing you a letter, a real one, with ink and everything." When the letter arrived, 3 weeks later, I read it on the beach at sunset. My mother's handwriting, usually perfect and controlled, looked shaken. She acknowledged everything: the manipulation, the conditional love, the way she'd turned parenthood into a risk management strategy. She didn't make excuses but tried to explain the fear that had driven their decisions. "We thought we were being practical," she wrote. "We didn't realize we were being cruel. We didn't see how it would affect you to grow up knowing you existed for a specific purpose. We never considered that you might want purposes of your own." I cried reading it, but they weren't bitter tears. They felt like release, like finally having my side of the story acknowledged. 6 months into my program, I published my first research paper on symbiotic relationships in reef ecosystems. Dr. Finnegan insisted I be the lead author, despite my protests that I was just a graduate student. The paper gained attention in the scientific community, and suddenly I was being invited to conferences and collaborating with researchers worldwide. "You're building quite the reputation," Dr. Finnegan noted one afternoon in the lab. "Already getting requests for you specifically to join research expeditions." I was examining a particularly fascinating coral sample when my phone buzzed. An email from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts. They wanted me to join a 6-month expedition studying deep-sea hydrothermal vents. "This is the big leagues," I said, showing Dr. Finnegan the invitation. She smiled proudly. "Only if you're ready. But yes, it's a career-defining opportunity." I accepted immediately. The expedition would start in 3 months, giving me time to wrap up my current projects in Australia. As I prepared to leave Brisbane, I realized how much I'd grown in just 1 year. I moved with confidence now, spoke up in meetings, pursued my curiosities without seeking permission. The night before my flight to Boston, We had a farewell party at the lab. Colleagues, classmates, and friends gathered to wish me well. Sarah and Kate gave emotional speeches about their crazy American roommate who never stops talking about fish. Alone in my apartment that night, packing my meager possessions, I found myself video calling home. All three of them answered. My parents had gathered at Rebecca's house for dinner. "We're so proud of you," my father said, and for the first time, I heard genuine admiration in his voice instead of the standard parental platitude. "You've really found yourself out there," Rebecca added, bouncing her new baby daughter on her lap. They'd named her Caroline, after our paternal grandmother. My mother remained mostly quiet during the call, occasionally offering words of encouragement. But before we hung up, she asked to speak to me privately. Once we were alone on the call, she took a deep breath. "I want you to know that I see you differently now," she said. "Not as Rachel's backup, not as part of some contingency plan. I see the incredible woman you've become, and I realize how wrong we were to ever think of you as anything less than complete in yourself." We talked for another hour, really talked, for perhaps the first time in our relationship. She shared her own regrets about giving up her painting career when she married, about how she'd projected her own sense of purposelessness onto me. We didn't resolve everything, but we reached an understanding. The Woods Hole expedition exceeded all expectations. We discovered 3 new species in the hydrothermal vents, including one that locals eventually dubbed Harrison's star, a creature that could survive in extreme temperatures through a unique chemical process. I found myself in the media, fielding interview requests, suddenly becoming a young face in marine biology. At 26, I'd become everything my parents never imagined I could be. Not a spare parts warehouse for my sister, not a disappointment, compared to Rebecca's achievements, but a scientist making meaningful contributions to human knowledge. When I returned from the expedition, I received a job offer from Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego. Taking it would bring me closer to family, but this time on my own terms. I had my own apartment overlooking the ocean, my own research budget, my own lab team. The first Sunday back, I joined the family for dinner. The tension that always existed in group gatherings had lessened considerably. Rebecca's daughter Caroline toddled around, providing welcome distraction from heavier topics. Joseph regaled us with stories from his law practice, and I shared tales from the deep sea. "I brought something for you," I told my mother after dinner. I handed her a gallery-quality print of one of my underwater photographs, a vibrant reef teeming with life. "For your living room, maybe to replace that awful landscape you've had forever." She looked at it for a long moment, then at me. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Like you. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." Progress came in small moments like these. My parents had turned their misguided protectiveness into something productive, joining support groups for families dealing with medical challenges. They volunteered at the hospital, sharing their story as a cautionary tale about the difference between being prepared and being controlling. 1 year later, I was invited back to speak at the University of Queensland. As I stood before eager students talking about following your curiosity wherever it leads, I caught sight of my parents in the audience. They'd flown all the way to Australia to hear me speak. Afterward, as we explored Brisbane together, I showed them my old apartment, the lab where I'd made my first discoveries, the beaches where I'd found myself. "I never thanked you properly," I told them on our last night there, "for the conversations that followed that wedding night. Yes, what you said was devastatingly wrong, but it forced us to confront the truth. It led us to real change. We were sitting at a restaurant overlooking the Brisbane River, sharing a meal that felt truly familial for the first time in decades. We're the ones who should thank you," my father said, "for giving us the chance to do better, for not writing us off completely." The evening stretched on, filled with genuine conversation and laughter. As I watched my parents interact with the waiter, admire the local architecture, show genuine interest in my work, I realized we'd all changed. The wedding toast that had once felt like the ultimate betrayal had become a catalyst for an authentic relationship. Back home in San Diego, I threw myself into my research. My lab at Scripps became a hub of innovative work. I mentored graduate students, collaborated with international teams, and occasionally found myself on the covers of scientific journals. Each achievement felt earned, not given, not taken for. Granted, I also started dating someone, Dr. Andrew Coleman, a climatologist who shared my passion for ocean conservation. Unlike earlier relationships, this one felt balanced. He admired my work, supported my ambitions, and never once suggested I had been born for any purpose other than being exactly who I wanted to be. Life settled into a rhythm that felt right. Weekly family dinners where everyone shared genuine interest in each other's lives. Weekend research trips that sometimes included my sister and her growing family. Video calls with international colleagues and new friends worldwide. A purpose that was entirely my own. 5 years after that fateful wedding toast, Rebecca announced she was pregnant again. This time, when the family gathered to celebrate, my mother raised her glass with trembling hands once more. The sight sent a chill through me, déjà vu threatening to ruin another milestone. But instead of releasing long-buried secrets, she simply said, "To new beginnings, second chances, and loving our children for exactly who they are, not who we think they should be." I caught her eye across the table. We smiled, genuine understanding smiles born of hard work and harder truths. The past couldn't be changed, but the future remained unwritten. In my lab the next week, examining a new species of bioluminescent jellyfish, I reflected on the strange path that had led me here. My phone buzzed with a text from Andrew. "Dinner. At 8? Have exciting news about the grant?" I smiled, responding with a quick affirmative. As I carefully returned the specimen to its tank, watching it pulse with light in the darkness, I thought about purpose. How we're told we need to find it, yet sometimes it finds us in the most unexpected ways. I might have started as my family's insurance policy, but I'd become so much more. A scientist, a teacher, a partner, a sister, a daughter, with all the complexity that role entailed. Most importantly, I'd become someone who existed for no reason other than the simple fact that I did, and that was purpose enough. The jellyfish continued its gentle dance in the tank, creating its own light in the darkness. Like all living things, it simply was. And sometimes I had learned that was the greatest purpose of all. My phone lit up. Again, a group text from Rebecca, our parents, and me. Rebecca had sent an ultrasound photo of her new baby-to-be. My father responded with heart emojis. My mother wrote, "Can't wait to meet this perfect little soul who will be loved exactly as they are." I typed my response. So excited to be an auntie again. As I hit send, I realized I meant it completely, without reservation or shadow from the past. We had become a family that loved freely, without conditions or contingencies. The journey had been painful, but it had led us here, to truth, to understanding, to real connection. In the end, that wedding toast had done more than air family secrets. It had shattered illusions, forced conversations, demanded growth. Like the hydrothermal vents I studied, it had created conditions for new life to emerge from the depths of dysfunction. I was Emily Harrison, marine biologist, researcher, sister, daughter. I existed not as backup to anyone else's story, but as the author of my own. And every day, I chose to write another page in that story, creating a life of purpose that was authentically mine. The laboratory hummed around me, filled with the quiet sounds of filtration systems and the soft glow of various specimens. Outside, the Pacific Ocean stretched to the horizon, holding mysteries yet to be discovered. I had work to do, grants to write, students to mentor, and a dinner date to look forward to. Walking to my office to finish the day's paperwork, I passed my wall of achievements, degrees, publications, and yes, family photos too. There was the infamous wedding picture, Rebecca radiant in her gown, me beside her in lavender silk. We'd kept it despite everything, perhaps as a reminder of how far we'd traveled from that moment. As I shut down my computer and prepared to head home, I thought one more time about that night at the wedding. The champagne glasses, the hushed crowd, my mother's devastating words. They had been meant to diminish me, to define me by my utility to others. Instead, they had set me free. Dr. Margaret Finnegan's voice echoed in my memory. You have the instincts of a natural scientist. Not because I was anyone's insurance policy. Not because I was filling a role. Because I had curiosity, talent, and drive. The laboratory door locked behind me with a soft click. Outside, San Diego's sunshine painted everything golden. I had a 40-minute drive to prepare for dinner with Andrew, during which I'd likely spend half the time thinking about tomorrow's research and half thinking about the exciting news he wanted to share. As I walked to my car, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. Confident posture, lab coat draped over one arm, an expression of contentment. This was who I'd become, not despite my past, but because I'd faced it, processed it, and moved beyond it. The journey from family dysfunction to personal triumph rarely follows a straight path. Mine had wound through tears, anger, continents, and oceans. It had required letting go of resentment, building new relationships, and occasionally salvaging old ones. Most importantly, it had demanded that I see myself clearly, independently, of anyone else's expectations or definitions. Settling into my car, I glanced at my phone one last time before driving. A text from Rebecca. Mom's seeing her new therapist tomorrow. Says she wants to discuss acknowledging impact more fully. Small steps indeed. But they added up to miles, to journeys, to transformations. As I pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward whatever news Andrew had to share, heading toward another evening of lived purpose, I felt profound gratitude for the path that had brought me here. The girl who'd once been introduced to a wedding party as an insurance policy had grown into a woman who ensured her own future. Every choice, every achievement, every relationship in my life now existed because I wanted it there, not because someone else had predetermined its necessity. At the stoplight, I opened Spotify and selected a playlist titled Lab Jams, a mix of music that kept me energized during long research sessions. The first song began, something upbeat and optimistic. Appropriate, I thought, for this chapter of my life. The light turned green. I pressed the accelerator, merging into the flow of traffic. San Diego streets carried me toward new possibilities, new conversations, new moments to be lived entirely on my own terms. Behind me lay degrees and discoveries, complicated family dinners and hard-won understanding. Ahead waited for whatever came next. Research breakthroughs, relationship milestones, perhaps even my own family someday. For the first time in my life, the future felt wide open, unscripted by anyone's expectations but my own. I didn't exist, just in case anymore. I existed because I chose to, every single day. And that choice made all the difference. Andrew's news at dinner turned out to be spectacular. We'd received a triple-sized grant from the National Science Foundation to study coral microbiomes. As we celebrated with champagne at a beachfront restaurant in La Jolla, I couldn't help but notice the parallel. Fancy drinks at significant moments seemed to run in my family, though this time the outcome was decidedly more positive. $3.5 million, Andrew repeated, still sounding incredulous. They doubled what we requested. The review board specifically mentioned your work on the reef parasite study. I set down my glass, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with alcohol. We're really going to be able to fund 5 PhD students and get that new spectroscopy equipment? Everything. Plus, they want us to establish a fellowship program for Indigenous marine scientists. Andrew reached across the table and took my hand. Em, this is huge. You've built something incredible here. Later that night, as I unpacked groceries for tomorrow's lab potluck, my phone rang. Rachel's name appeared on the screen. She only called this late when something was wrong. Hey, is everything okay? The baby? The baby's fine. She paused. Mom collapsed at yoga class this afternoon. She's at Scripps Hospital now. My stomach dropped. What happened? They're still running tests. Dad said something about her blood pressure and possible arrhythmia. Can you come? I know it's late, but I'll be there in 20 minutes. The emergency room bustled with Friday night activity. I found my family in a private waiting area, my father looking ashen, Rebecca pacing with Caroline asleep in a stroller, Joseph on his phone handling work calls he couldn't abandon. Any updates? I asked, sitting beside my father. They're doing an EKG now. The doctor mentioned stress as a possible trigger. He rubbed his face. She's been pushing herself too hard with the volunteering, the therapy sessions, trying to make amends. Rebecca stopped pacing. This isn't about the past. Mom's been having symptoms for weeks, dizzy spells, shortness of breath. She didn't tell us because she didn't want anyone to worry. Of course she didn't, I muttered, then regretted my sarcasm. Old habits died hard. 3 hours later, a cardiologist named Dr. Kumar emerged with news. Mrs. Harrison has an irregular heartbeat called atrial fibrillation. Combined with stress and mild dehydration, it caused the episode. We're admitting her overnight for monitoring, but she should be fine with proper medication and lifestyle adjustments. Can we see her? My father asked. 2 at a time. My father gestured for me to go first. You should see her alone. Dad, that's not... Please, Emily. She's been worried about you more than any of us. Go. I entered room 407, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. My mother lay propped against pillows, looking smaller than usual without her perfect makeup and styled hair. An IV drip snaked into her arm. Oh, sweetie, you didn't have to come, she said when she saw me. Rebecca called. Of course I came. I pulled a chair close to her bed. How are you feeling? Foolish. All this fuss over some heart flutters. But her voice shook slightly. We talked about the medical details, the treatment plan, how she'd need to reduce stress. Then silence fell between us, heavy with unspoken things. I read your new article, she said finally, about the jellyfish bioluminescence affecting entire reef ecosystems. Dad subscribed to that marine biology journal. You did? Sometimes I don't understand half the words, but I read every paper you publish. She adjusted her hospital gown. I'm trying to know you, Emily. The real you, not the one I invented in my head. I appreciate that. I meant it, though the words felt inadequate. You must hate me sometimes, she said softly. The simple statement hung in the sterile air. I could have agreed, could have unleashed years of resentment. Instead, I found myself being honest. I hated what you did, but I don't hate you. Hate takes too much energy, and I need all of mine for my research. She laughed weakly. Always so practical, like your father. Actually, I think I'm more like you than either of us realized. We both fixate on problems until we solve them. You just fixated on the wrong problem. Over the next hour, we talked more openly than we had in years. She shared how she'd grown up in a family that measured worth by utility, how her own mother had pushed her toward marriage instead of art school. The cycle of conditional love had started generations before. I thought I was different with you. Girls, she said. I see now I just found a new way to make love conditional. When visiting hours ended, I rejoined the family in the waiting room. Rebecca had finally gotten Caroline to sleep on a makeshift bed of hospital chairs and Joseph's coat. How is she really? Rebecca asked quietly, scared, reflective, human. I sat down, suddenly exhausted. She reads my research papers. Rebecca smiled sadly. She kept asking the wedding photographer for extra copies of every picture with you in it. She has a whole album now. We sat in companionable silence, the kind only possible between siblings who've survived shared trauma. Eventually, my father returned from speaking to the doctors. They want her to stay tomorrow too for additional monitoring. Then she'll need follow-up with a cardiologist here in San Diego. He looked at me. Emily, given your research connections at Scripps, perhaps you could recommend someone? The request felt significant. My expertise sought for something genuinely important to our family. Dr. Patricia Chen in cardiology. She's brilliant and patient-focused. I'll call her tomorrow. We left the hospital as dawn painted the sky. I headed home, exhausted but somehow lighter. Coffee and a hot shower revived me enough to check work emails before the Saturday morning soccer game I'd promised to attend for one of my grad students. Field was crowded with families supporting the university's intramural league. I cheered from the sidelines as my student Lisa scored twice for the marine biology department team. Between plays, I responded to texts about my mother's condition and fielded condolences from colleagues who'd heard the news. Dr. Harrison, I turned to find a young woman about 18 wearing a UCSD campus tour t-shirt. Yes? I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm Kelly Fisher. I'm visiting from Colorado to check out the marine biology program. She clutched a campus brochure nervously. Your paper on symbiotic reef relationships is why I want to study here. Would it be okay if I asked you some questions? For the next 20 minutes, I found myself mentoring an aspiring scientist, explaining the program requirements, research opportunities, and the realities of pursuing marine biology. Her questions were insightful, her enthusiasm infectious. The best advice I can give, I told her, is to follow your curiosity wherever it leads. Don't let anyone else define what you're meant to study or become. After Kelly left, I realized someone had been recording our conversation. Dr. Chen, the cardiologist I'd mentioned to my father, was sitting nearby with her own daughter on the team. That was beautifully said, she remarked, approaching me. About following one's path. Patricia, I didn't know you had a daughter playing. Sarah's the goalie. I hear I might have a new patient to worry about besides you. My mother. I was going to call Monday. Your father already did. She's scheduled for next Wednesday. Don't worry. I'll take excellent care of her. The conversation drifted to my recent grant success, her own research on genetic factors in heart conditions, the overlap between our fields. By the game's end, we'd sketched ideas for a collaborative study on ocean acidification's effects on coastal populations' cardiovascular health. That afternoon, I visited the hospital again. My mother looked better, color returned to her cheeks. My father sat reading the newspaper while Rebecca entertained Caroline with picture books. The nurse said you went full professor mode with that aspiring student this morning, my father commented when I arrived. Word travels fast in this hospital. Dr. Chen's daughter told her mom, who told your mother's nurse, who told us. Rebecca smiled. The nurse said you were incredibly encouraging. She reminded me of myself at that age. Bright, ambitious, uncertain. I settled into a chair, though hopefully with better family support. We're trying, my father said quietly. The improvement in our family dynamic was undeniable, but fragile. Small kindnesses replaced old tensions. My mother no longer critiqued my appearance or lifestyle choices. My father asked genuine questions about my work instead of waiting for opportunities to lecture. Rebecca and I had developed the sister relationship that had been difficult when we were competing for parental attention, yet the past lingered in subtle ways. I still caught myself tensing when my mother offered advice. My father occasionally slipped into authoritarian mode when discussing family decisions. Old wounds didn't disappear overnight. 2 weeks after my mother's hospitalization, we gathered for Rebecca's second baby shower. Unlike the formal affairs our mother once organized, this was a backyard barbecue with both families and close friends. Joseph manned the grill while Caroline played with other toddlers on the new swing set. I helped Rebecca open gifts in the dappled shade of the lemon tree. Baby blankets, clothes, and the inevitable mountain of diapers appeared from colorful bags. "This one's special," Rebecca said, holding up a wrapped box. "It's from Mom." Inside was a hand-painted mobile featuring sea creatures, octopuses, sea turtles, tropical fish, even a tiny representation of that bioluminescent jellyfish I'd discovered. Each piece was meticulously detailed, showing artistic skill I didn't know my mother possessed. "I took up painting again," my mother explained from her lawn chair. "My therapist suggested I find creative outlets." The mobile was beautiful, but its significance struck deeper. These weren't generic ocean animals. They were specific species from my research, painted with scientific accuracy. She'd done the homework to understand my work. "It's gorgeous," I said honestly. "Your sister mentioned that the nursery has an underwater theme," my mother continued. "I spent hours looking at your published photographs for reference." The afternoon progressed easily. Joseph's parents, whom I'd met at the wedding, went out of their way to include me in conversations. Rebecca's friends, sophisticated professionals who'd once intimidated me with their polished achievements, now treated me as an equal, genuinely interested in my marine research. During a quiet moment, I found my father by the rose bushes. That had always been my mother's pride. "You know," he said, not looking at me, "when you were born, the first thing I thought was that you had my mother's eyes. Not until I held you did the practical considerations enter my mind. Dad, we don't need to, please let me finish." He turned toward me. "I spent years letting practical concerns overshadow wonder. You were such a curious baby, always watching everything, reaching for things just out of grasp. I should have nurtured that curiosity instead of trying to protect against potential futures." We talked until Joseph called us for cake. These conversations with my father came rarely but meant much. Each one helped rebuild understanding between us. The gathering wound down as the sun set. Caroline had fallen asleep against my shoulder while I read her a story about friendly sea turtles. Rebecca looked content, but tired, her pregnancy showing its effects. "Call if you need anything," I told her as I gathered my things. "I'm free tomorrow except for a lab safety inspection." "I might need help assembling the crib," she admitted. "Joseph's terrible with directions, and Mom can't lift. Heavy things since her heart episode. Text me the time. I'll bring my toolbox." Driving home, I reflected on how far we'd come since that disastrous wedding toast. The family dynamics had shifted fundamentally. We still had problems. What family didn't? But we'd learned to face them honestly instead of hiding behind pretense and denial. My phone rang as I pulled into my parking space. Emily Harrison. "Dr. Harrison, this is Mark Williams from the International Maritime Organization." My heart jumped. The IMO coordinated ocean research at the highest levels. "We've been following your work on coral reef preservation. We're assembling a task force to develop new international protocols for marine ecosystem protection. Would you consider joining as one of our scientific advisors?" Yes, absolutely. What would that entail? Quarterly meetings in Geneva, collaborative research standards, policy development. It's a significant commitment, but your groundbreaking research makes you uniquely qualified. After hanging up, I sat in my car for a moment, processing the offer. International recognition for my work felt surreal. 5 years ago, I'd been struggling to establish my identity beyond family baggage. Now, I was being invited to influence global marine policy. Inside my apartment, I made tea and called Andrew to share the news. He was in his home office finishing grant paperwork. That's incredible. Though I'll miss you during those Geneva trips." Maybe you could join me sometimes? Make it a working vacation? I like the way you think. We discussed the logistics, until my stomach growled, reminding me I'd skipped dinner while assembling mobile phones and answering questions about coral bleaching. The following morning at the lab, I found my team already at work. Lisa had early diving permits to collect samples from the protected reef zone. Tom was calibrating new equipment. Maria worked with the undergraduate interns on proper specimen cataloging. "Boss, we have company," Tom announced as I entered. "Graduate. Admissions sent 3 prospective students to observe our lab for the day. The visitors were impressive. A woman from MIT, a man from University of British Columbia, and another from Georgia Tech. All had strong academic records and compelling research interests that aligned with our work. During a break, Kelly, the aspiring student I'd met at the soccer game, appeared at the lab door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Dr. Harrison. I was visiting the campus library and realized I never thanked you properly for your advice yesterday." "Not at all. How are you finding UCSD?" "Amazing. The marine lab facilities are incredible." She hesitated. "I got accepted to other programs, but after talking to you, I think this is where I belong." "Because of the facilities?" "Because of the mentorship culture. You made time for me even though you were dealing with family stress. That says something about the kind of scientist and person you are." After Kelly left, one of the prospective graduate students approached me. "That was really meaningful, what you told her about following curiosity. It's advice I wish I'd received earlier in life." We spent the afternoon showing the prospects our research processes, from field collection to laboratory analysis. Their questions were sophisticated, pushing both me and my team to articulate our methodologies clearly. "The best part of this lab," Maria told them during the final tour, "is that Dr. Harrison encourages us to pursue unexpected findings. She doesn't enforce traditional research hierarchies." At day's end, all 3 prospects expressed strong interest in our program. After they left, I gathered my team for a brief meeting. "You all handled that beautifully. Your passion for the work really showed." "We learned from the best," Lisa said. "Actually, I've been learning from all of you. The collaborative environment we've built here. That's because of the team we've become." Back in my office, I reviewed the prospective students' applications more thoroughly. Each had overcome challenges: financial hardship, cultural barriers, personal setbacks, to pursue marine science. Their determination reminded me of my own journey. A knock interrupted my reading. My mother stood at the door, looking uncertain. "Mom, is everything okay?" The cardiologist said, "Everything's fine. I was driving past after my volunteer shift at the marine sanctuary. I thought I'd see where you work." I'd never given her a tour of the lab. She'd never asked. "Would you like to see around?" Pride flickered in her eyes as I showed her the equipment, explained ongoing research projects, introduced her to team members still in the lab. She asked intelligent questions about the coral restoration research, clearly having done homework to understand my field better. In my office, she paused at the wall of photographs, reef systems, marine life, field research teams. Her eyes lingered on one picture in particular. Me in full scuba gear, holding up a newly discovered coral specimen, grinning with pure joy. "I've never seen you that happy," she said quietly. "I've never been that happy. Not until I was free to find my own purpose." She nodded, understanding implicit in her silence. Driving her back to her car, she mentioned her own new projects. "I'm coordinating an art therapy program for families dealing with medical challenges. The hospital director thought my personal experience could help others navigate similar situations." "That's wonderful. You're using what you learned from your mistakes to help others avoid them." "Exactly. Though I worry sometimes that I'm overcompensating." "Maybe," I admitted. "But overcompensating is better than not compensating at all." She laughed, genuine, free laughter that sounded foreign coming from her. "When did you become so wise?" Probably around the same time I stopped trying to earn your approval. That evening, Andrew and I finalized plans for marine sanctuary expansion with local environmentalists. The grant money would fund not just research but practical conservation efforts that could save endangered coral systems. We should celebrate properly, Andrew suggested after the meeting. Dinner somewhere special? Perfect. But first, I need to make a call. I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring. Hi, Mom. I wanted to say thank you for visiting the lab today. Oh, sweetie, thank you for showing me around. I'm so impressed with what you've built. I'm calling because... I took a breath. Because I wanted to tell you something important. For most of my life, I thought my value came from being useful to others. You reinforced that, yes, but I also internalized it. And I want you to know that I don't think like that anymore. Emily, let me finish. You've been trying so hard to make amends, and it means something. But the best thing you can do is just be proud of who I am now. Not because I turned out successful despite what you did, but because I became exactly who I was meant to be. That's enough. We're enough. The line was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. You are so much more than enough, Emily. You are extraordinary. Hanging up, I felt a closure I hadn't realized I needed. The validation wasn't just for me, it was for us both. She needed to forgive herself as much as I needed to completely forgive her. Andrew ordered Thai food while I prepared for tomorrow's early research dive. My phone buzzed with a group text from Rebecca. Caroline had said Aunt Emily for the first time. Life had woven itself into a new pattern. Family relationships that once felt obligatory now held genuine warmth. My career had not just survived the initial upheaval, but had thrived because of the authenticity I'd found through it. The girl who'd once existed as a backup plan was now mentoring others, shaping policy, and making discoveries that contributed to human knowledge. The acceptance letter from the International Maritime Organization arrived the following week. Reading it at my desk, surrounded by research papers and photographs of ocean life, I felt profound gratitude for every difficult step that had led here. Purpose, I'd learned, wasn't something predetermined or bestowed. It was cultivated through pain and passion, setback and persistence. My phone rang. Rebecca's number appeared. I'm in labor, she announced calmly. Joseph's getting the car. Can you meet us at the hospital? On my way. Standing in the parking lot of Scripps La Jolla Hospital 20 minutes later, I watched my sister walk toward the labor and delivery entrance, supported by her husband, our parents following close behind. This hospital had seen our family through crises and recoveries, heartbreak and healing. In the waiting room, we'd have hours to fill with conversation and silence, anticipation and anxiety. My mother would probably knit. My father would pace. I'd get work emails but try to ignore them. Together, we'd await another addition to our reconstructed family. As I followed them inside, catching the automatic door before it closed, I smiled at the irony. Years ago, I'd been conceived as an insurance policy for one sister. Now I rushed to welcome the arrival of another family member, not to serve any purpose other than to be celebrated for simply existing. The cycle of conditional love had finally broken. What remained was imperfect but genuine. A family learning to love without reservation, to accept without agenda, to cherish each member as complete in themselves. The best kind of security, not keeping people as insurance policies, but creating bonds strong enough to weather whatever storms might come. The call came during my morning swim at the Monterey Bay Aquarium's research tank. Emerging from the observation chamber where I'd been testing new equipment, I found Andrew on the deck with our staff satellite phone. It's urgent, he mouthed silently. The voice on the line belonged to Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Chilean National Aquaculture Institute. Dr. Coleman, we have a crisis. Massive coral bleaching event along our coast. We need your rapid response protocols immediately. My heart sank. Another coral die-off this year? Climate change was accelerating faster than our projections. Within the hour, I'd assembled my emergency response team via video conference. Scientists across continents coordinated strategies, combining local knowledge with international resources. By afternoon, I was on a plane to Santiago, leaving Andrew to manage the lab and the children. This was the reality of our partnership. Sometimes we orbited separately to achieve our shared mission. The Chilean coast presented devastation I'd hoped never to witness again. Bleached coral stretched for kilometers, ghostly white against azure waters. Local divers wept openly, describing reefs they'd known since childhood turning barren. We followed every protocol, Dr. Vasquez explained, gesturing helplessly at her research station. Temperature monitoring, pH controls, artificial cooling systems, but the heat wave exceeded all predictions. Working 18-hour days, we implemented emergency interventions, translocating surviving coral to deeper, cooler waters, testing new shade structure designs, collecting reproductive materials to preserve genetic diversity. Every day brought small victories amid overwhelming loss. On my third night, exhausted and heartbroken, I video called home during dinner time. Caroline appeared on screen first, now 9 and eerily perceptive. "Aunt Em, you look really sad." "Some of the ocean creatures are sick, sweetie. I'm trying to help them." "Like when I had to take medicine for my ear infection?" Something like that. The simplicity of her understanding helped. "Everyone's helping, though. We're a big team." 3 weeks later, returning to California, I carried both hope and grief. We'd saved perhaps 30% of the affected reefs. Genetic material from lost species might enable future restoration. The international response had broken funding records, suggesting humanity might finally grasp the urgency. Andrew met me at the airport, 5-year-old Grace sleeping against his chest, 3-year-old Maya clutching his hand. Their embrace felt like a sanctuary. "I smell like the ocean," I warned. "You always smell like possibility," he replied. Home meant adjusting to California time while my mind remained fixed on Chilean waters. Research papers needed completing. Graduate students required guidance. But mostly, I needed to process what I'd witnessed, the acceleration of changes we'd predicted in decades happening in years. That weekend, my extended family gathered for our traditional Sunday dinner. Rebecca's restaurant choices always accommodated everyone's dietary needs while ensuring excellent food. Tonight's selection, a farm-to-table bistro with ocean views, suited our clan perfectly. "You're quieter than usual," my mother observed, studying me across the table. Her artist's eye missed a little. "Just thinking about what we're leaving behind for them." I gestured toward the children's table, where Caroline taught Grace and Maya about fancy restaurant behavior. "Are things really that bad?" "They're challenging, but not hopeless." I chose my words carefully. Every generation faces defining struggles. This is ours. Later, as children chased seagulls on the restaurant's patio, my father joined me at the railing. 10 years ago, he'd insisted on protective detachment. Now he offered a supportive presence. "Your mother's been painting the Chilean coast obsessively since you left," he mentioned. "Processing second-hand grief, she calls it." "How's that working?" "She's created 30 pieces. Gallery wants to exhibit them for climate awareness fundraising." "Mom's art-saving coral reefs. Never thought I'd see the day." People change when they stop hiding from their feelings. He glanced at me sideways. Present company included. The following month brought unexpected recognition. Nomination for the Nobel Prize in Environmental Science. The committee praised integrative approaches bridging scientific research with policy implementation and international collaboration. The nomination brought media attention I hadn't anticipated. Interviews, photo shoots, profile pieces. Journalists wanted the dramatic story. Family dysfunction redeemed through scientific achievement. I preferred highlighting the countless researchers who made global impact possible. You're the face of this movement whether you want to be or not, Rebecca pointed out during one of our sister calls. She'd become my unofficial PR advisor, understanding public perception in ways I couldn't. I'd rather be the backbone. Why? Not both? Think of the platform for advocacy. She was right. Speaking invitations multiplied. Universities, NGOs, even corporate boards wanted to understand how science could inspire systemic change. I accepted strategically, choosing platforms that amplified messages beyond personal narrative. During one keynote at Stanford, a student asked, "Dr. Coleman, how do you maintain hope when climate data suggests catastrophic outcomes?" The packed auditorium held its breath. This was the question plaguing young environmentalists. Hope isn't denial of reality, I answered carefully. It's insistence on possibility within reality. Every degree of warming we prevent matters. Every species we save matters. Every person we inspire to care matters. Hope means working desperately because the alternative is unacceptable. After the talk, the student approached me. I almost dropped my marine biology major, she admitted. I was convinced it was pointless. What changed your mind? Your story showed that individual purpose can align with collective need. That's not pointless. These conversations accumulated. Young scientists struggling with eco-anxiety, parents worried about children's futures, indigenous communities seeing traditional knowledge finally valued in environmental solutions. I'd inadvertently become what I'd once resented being, someone whose personal story served a larger purpose. 3 months before the Nobel ceremony, my mother suffered another heart episode. This time, the symptoms presented differently: shortness of breath, dizziness, but no chest pain. Andrew found her passed out in our kitchen during a visit, Grace napping peacefully upstairs. "I'm fine," she protested as paramedics checked. "Vitals. Just overheated." "Mom, you're 72. Pretending you're invincible doesn't make it true." The tests revealed more serious arrhythmia. Surgery to implant a pacemaker became necessary. As I sat with her in pre-op, our conversation meandered through memory. "Do you ever regret having me?" I asked, surprisingly vulnerable. Years of therapy hadn't eliminated all lingering questions. She gripped my hand. "I regret how I framed you. But regret your existence? Never. You became exactly who you were meant to be, despite our limitations. Because of them, maybe. Perhaps. Pain can be a teacher, though I wish we'd found less traumatic lessons." The surgery proceeded smoothly. During recovery, my parents' apartment was filled with visitors. Rebecca's law firm sent flowers. Andrew's parents brought meal deliveries. Joseph organized a care schedule among our families. Children painted "Get Well Grammy" pictures that covered every surface. "This is what we built," Rebecca whispered one evening as she organized medications while I fed Maya dinner. "Real support. No agendas." 6 weeks later, my mother attended my Nobel Prize ceremony. Stockholm's December weather challenged her newly regulated heart, but nothing could keep her away. She sat in the front row beside my father, both transformed into people who could witness triumph without claiming credit. The ceremony proceeded with traditional grandeur. As they placed the medal around my neck, I thought of all the ceremonies where I'd felt invisible or instrumentalized. This recognition belonged not just to me, but to everyone who'd believed in purpose beyond expectation. My acceptance speech acknowledged the personal alongside the professional. Science saved me before I could save anything else. Not because it offered escape, but because it demanded I become fully myself. The same courage required to claim your own identity prepares you to fight for threatened identities in nature. After Stockholm, life resumed its intense rhythm. The Nobel medal traveled to my lab for a week, inspiring students who'd never imagined such recognition possible. Graduate seminars explored how scientific achievement could emerge from unlikely origins. Dr. Coleman, one student asked during office hours, how do you handle people who still see you primarily through your family story? I let them. If my story inspires them to reconsider their own family dynamics or pursue unexpected paths, that serves a good purpose. Just don't reduce anyone to single narratives, yourself included. Spring brought the expansion of our Monterey Marine Sanctuary. State and federal funding approved protected zones extending 90 miles offshore. Local fishing communities initially resisted, fearing economic loss, until we demonstrated sustainable fishing partnerships could coexist with preservation. I spent mornings in community centers, listening to generations of fishing families share their knowledge. Afternoons meant translating their observations into scientific frameworks. Evenings found me developing hybrid policies honoring both tradition and conservation. You're straddling worlds again, Andrew observed one night. Scientist, diplomat, family mediator. Straddling feels less like splitting now, more like bridging. Our oldest, Maya, turned 7 that April. She'd inherited my curiosity and Andrew's analytical mind. Her underwater photography project for school combined science with art, documenting how marine life adapted to human presence. Want to see my exhibition? She asked proudly one Saturday morning. Her room walls displayed photos alongside handwritten observations. These kelpfish learn to hide in plastic bags people drop. Evolution happening. Maybe one day you'll solve what your parents couldn't, I said, admiring her work. Or maybe you'll teach me, and I'll build on it, she replied pragmatically. That's how science works, right? Her intellectual inheritance felt different from genetics or obligation. An invitation rather than burden. Creating space for children to discover their own callings while providing foundations seemed the essence of evolved parenting. Summer marked the 10th anniversary of Andrew's proposal. Returning to the same tide pools with our 3 children felt sweetly recursive. Caroline photographed creatures with professional equipment I'd gifted her. Grace collected shells while Maya sketched their shapes. Andrew and I watched our legacy splash through shallow waters. 10 years ago, I was terrified you'd see me as too complicated, I confessed. I saw you as complete. Still do. That evening, hosting a casual anniversary party, I noticed how seamlessly our families integrated. My parents helped set up while Andrew's parents entertained children. Rebecca and Joseph coordinated kid logistics with practiced precision. Speech time, someone called as champagne appeared. Andrew raised his glass. 10 years of marriage, 3 amazing kids, 2 Nobel laureates. 1, I interrupted. You're married to me. That makes 2 laureates by association. Laughter followed. But seriously, Emily taught me that love multiplies when it doesn't divide us. Here's to many more years of expanding together. Applause filled our backyard as children created their own toast versions with juice boxes. Love did multiply, creating warmth that extended beyond immediate family into chosen connections. Later, after guests departed and children slept, Andrew and I sat on our deck reviewing. Decades worth of changes. The ocean gleamed under moonlight, eternal and evolving. What's next on our grand agenda? He asked. Antarctic Research Station development, training program for indigenous marine scientists, teaching Caroline advanced microscope techniques, addressing whatever crisis tomorrow brings. Always ambitious, always together. Our life had settled into sustainable intensity. Scientific breakthroughs alternated with family milestones. Climate work demanded urgent dedication while children required present attention. Balance became negotiation rather than achievement. Early. Fall brought an invitation to address the United Nations Climate Action Summit. Speaking for marine ecosystems and the scientists working desperately to preserve them carried tremendous weight. Standing at the UN podium, addressing world leaders, I channeled everything I'd learned about fighting for space and purpose. We save what we love. Love begins with recognition. Recognition requires we see each other clearly, nations, species, individuals, as essential rather than expendable. The ocean connects all life. Let this recognition connect us meaningfully. The response exceeded expectations. Multiple countries pledged funding for marine research initiatives. International partnerships formed immediately afterward. Change felt agonizingly slow, yet suddenly accelerating. Back home, exhausted but energized, I found Caroline in our lab photographing microscopic organisms. At 10, she moved with confidence among expensive equipment, understanding both potential and responsibility. "Mom, look at this." She gestured excitedly to her microscope. "The phytoplankton are communicating using bioluminescence patterns. I'm documenting their sequences." Her discovery had genuine scientific merit. Phytoplankton communication systems might unlock new understanding of oceanic chemistry. Watching her chart findings enthusiastically, I recognized familiar, determined joy. "This could be published," I told her seriously, "if you're willing to write it up properly." Would I be the youngest published marine biologist? Possibly. Does that matter? She thought thoughtfully. Only if it inspires other kids to believe they can discover important things too. This, I realized, was the transformation complete. Purpose inherited not through prescribed roles, but demonstrated possibility. Each generation built on previous growth rather than repeating previous mistakes. The following weekend marked our family's annual reunion at the Santa Cruz Beach House. 3 generations gathered for several days of chaos and connection. My parents, approaching their mid-70s gracefully, maintained active lives while appreciating slower rhythms. "Remember when we first started renting this place?" Rebecca asked, watching children chase waves. "Everything felt so fragile." "Nothing's permanent," I replied, "but some things have real strength." Our beach house tradition had endured 5 years, evolving from tentative gathering to confident celebration. Morning walks featured different participants daily. Afternoons brought tide pool exploration, board games, or impromptu art sessions with my mother teaching technique to eager grandchildren. "Grace has your mother's eye for color," Andrew commented, observing our youngest create sand paintings while my mother guided gently. "And Maya has your father's precision," I added, watching Maya measure sandcastle proportions with geometric accuracy. Caroline, characteristically independent, constructed her own projects while documenting tide patterns for research she'd continue. At home, each child manifested different aspects of family DNA while remaining defiantly themselves. That night, after children slept and adults lingered by the fire pit, my father surprised everyone with uncharacteristic reflection. "I spent decades believing children should follow prescribed paths," he said slowly. "Building foundations seemed safer than encouraging exploration. But watching you all now, Emily changing global policies, Rebecca transforming legal advocacy, these brilliant grandchildren finding their own ways, I see my error clearly." "You can't rewrite the past, Michael," my mother interjected gently. "No, but I can acknowledge it shaped us, sometimes through pain rather than despite it." He looked at me directly. "Emily, you became extraordinary not because of our mistakes, but because you refused to be defined by them." Such acknowledgments came rarely from him, carrying weight precisely because of their scarcity. Our family had learned that healing accepted imperfect progress rather than demanding wholesale transformation. The reunion continued peacefully, punctuated by children's laughter and ocean's rhythm. One morning, finding myself alone on the beach, at dawn, I collected shells while considering upcoming decisions. Portugal had invited me to lead their new Marine Conservation Institute. The position meant relocating internationally again, though their flexible structure accommodated family needs. Andrew supported whatever choice served our family's evolution best. Walking back to the house, I discovered my mother already awake, sketching the sunrise. "Can't sleep?" she asked without looking up. Thinking about Portugal. International moves get easier with practice. That's what worries me. Getting too comfortable leaving. She set down her pencil. You're not leaving anymore, Emily. You're bringing your family to where your purpose exists. It's a subtle difference. Crucial difference. Later that month, we accepted Portugal's offer with conditions allowing regular returns to California. The move meant new adventures while maintaining essential connections. Family had become portable, not tied to location, but to relationships strong enough to bridge distance. Preparing for relocation, I organized my laboratory for transition. Several team members would join the Portuguese Institute while others maintained our Monterey operations. Science thrived through distributed networks now. This place changed my life, Lisa told me during our farewell lunch. She'd been my first San Diego hire, now leading her own research division. You showed us that mentorship meant creating space, not filling it. You taught me that leadership adapts to individual needs rather than forcing conformity. These exchanges happened frequently as departure approached. Colleagues, students, collaborators sharing how our years together had influenced their work. Scientific community had become a genuine community. On our last weekend in Monterey, extended family gathered at our bungalow for an informal goodbye celebration. No dramatic speeches, just shared food and comfortable presence. Children played with visiting cousins while adults reminisced and planned future visits. You know what I'm most grateful for? Rebecca asked me privately while we cleaned up after lunch. That our children see aunts and uncles who love deeply rather than siblings who merely tolerate each other. Think they even know we had that drama? Caroline probably assumes some. She's eerily perceptive, but she sees the after, not the during. That's the gift. Breaking generational cycles meant children inherited resolved rather than active conflict. They learned love through observation of real affection rather than performance of required roles. During final packing, I discovered journals from early San Diego years. Reading entries from my first laboratory days, I found descriptions of isolation, imposter syndrome, and a desperate need to prove myself worthy of the space I occupied. Listen to this, I called to Andrew. May 15th. Still waiting for someone to realize I don't belong here. Every achievement feels borrowed against my eventual exposure as fraud. The woman who just won a Nobel Prize thought she didn't belong? The woman who thought her value came through utility alone couldn't imagine belonging based on intrinsic worth. We'd both transformed dramatically since those early days. Marriage had weathered career pressures, international relocations, raising 3 human beings while trying to save countless marine species. Love had proven resilient precisely because we'd let it evolve, rather than prescribing its shape. Auntie. Moving day, similar chaos to years prior unfolded. But expectations had shifted entirely. No lurking dread of obligation fulfilled poorly. No anxiety about achieving enough to earn belonging. Just a bittersweet transition toward new adventures. At the airport, saying goodbye to Caroline's best friend proved hardest. 10-year-olds understand change intellectually while feeling it deeply emotionally. I'll video call every week, Caroline promised through tears. And you can visit Portugal. And you'll visit California still, her friend replied bravely. These childhood friendships mattered deeply. We'd prioritized maintaining connection across distance, knowing roots could stretch rather than break entirely. Hours later, flying over Pacific waters toward a new chapter, our family settled into a familiar airplane routine. Children colored, quietly, or read. Andrew reviewed research papers while I sketched preliminary ideas for Portugal's conservation programs. Grace climbed into my lap, sleepy from travel. Mommy, are we moving again? Yes, sweetie. To a place with beautiful oceans and friendly people. Will Grammy and Grandpa visit? Absolutely. Remember how they visited Australia when Mommy lived there? Family finds ways to stay together. She buried her face in my neck contentedly. These conversations came naturally now, explaining relocation without anxiety, maintaining connections across distance, treating change as adventure rather than loss. Landing in London for connection, I checked messages. Multiple notifications. From colleagues tracking the Chilean coral recovery, our intervention had succeeded better than predicted. Populations showed strong regeneration patterns. Such victories sustained momentum through challenging times. Good news? Andrew noticed my smile. Great news. The Chile project is exceeding recovery projections. See? You helped alter an ecosystem's trajectory. We did. All of us. Scientific achievement had become intrinsically collaborative. Individual recognition mattered less than collective progress. This understanding extended to family advancement too. Nobody's flourishing diminished others. As our flight departed London, children slept peacefully. Andrew dozed while I gazed out windows at the ocean 30,000 feet below. Entire, marine ecosystems existed beneath these clouds, worlds we'd barely begun exploring. Portugal awaited new laboratories, research partnerships, and cultural immersion. Family would visit frequently. Career momentum would continue building while prioritizing present moments with growing children. Purpose had become a multifaceted crystal, each angle reflecting different light. Scientist, mother, daughter, wife, mentor, advocate, roles that enhanced rather than competed with each other. The girl who once existed as a contingency plan now existed thoroughly, authentically, purposefully. Whatever Portugal brought, whether groundbreaking discoveries or everyday challenges, we'd face together, not because destiny proclaimed it or biology demanded it, but because we'd chosen, day by day, to build lives worth sharing. The ocean below continued its ancient patterns. Above, stars emerged as sunset painted the sky. Between water and cosmos, we traveled toward whatever tomorrow offered, carrying love that had learned to recognize rather than require, to suggest rather than dictate. Our story wasn't unique. Countless individuals fought to define themselves beyond others' expectations. But it was ours to continue writing. Each choice at hand created tomorrow's memories. Each child's laugh promised future possibility. Each wave below reminded us that purpose flowed eternally, accepting all tributaries willing to join its greater current. I closed my eyes, listening to my family's gentle breathing. In this airplane carrying us toward Portuguese adventures, I held everything that truly mattered. Companions chosen through love earned daily, purpose claimed through persistent courage, future open to infinite combinations of previously unimaginable, wonderful. The journey continued exactly as it should, forward, together, toward whatever horizon drew us next. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.